Thank you, Rotem, for the invitation. Karen, Skip, for guiding me through this. By the time we come out of this, I think we're all going to be like Zoom experts. I also wanted to thank you all for being here. It's really an honor because I'm going to be kind of working through some thoughts for the first time with you. So I appreciate your patience and thank you in advance for bearing with me, and look forward to your thoughts and questions afterwards. Since I met Rotem, I am still very much focused on place-based projects, but I'm also kind of using that as a lens to do things that extend beyond exhibitions. So tonight I'm going to talk about all of those facets, an exhibition, a book concept, what it means to do place-based programming in an international artist residency, and then perhaps what that all means in the time of coronavirus. So I'm going to share my screen now. Can everyone see that?
Not yet.
Okay. We practiced this and did so well. So hold on.
Oh, hang on. And yeah, you should be a co-host. You should be able to share. There we go.
Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So firstly, here's my little title card. I'm basically calling it place-based meanderings because I'm kind of just going to weave through a couple of things and I might get a little lost on occasion. But for starters, I should propose the question, what is a place-based practice? Or rather, what do I mean by place-based practices? And to be clear, I'm not talking about placemaking or the planning, design, or management of public spaces, because I think of placemaking as something that is fundamentally motivated by economic prospects and development, and it's designed, although it is designed with a sense of place, it kind of uses a rhetorical gimmick that assumes that there was no there prior. What I am interested in is the kind of proverbial, what's in your proverbial backyard. This is not my backyard, but a nice backyard. And I'm definitely interested in site-specific practices, but even more importantly, site-responsive practices and situation-specific practices and mostly community-centered ones. I'm really interested in projects that consider geography, locality, topography, history, and a sense of place through storytelling, engagement and collaboration with the constituencies of that locale, and the employment of memory as a transformative act. This is an oldie but a goodie that I kind of always find myself returning to. And so super briefly, I just wanted to talk about a couple of historical touch points that have been meaningful to me in my practice. Not that I necessarily love them all, but sometimes the projects that are the most influential are the ones that you're actually trying to not repeat. The Sculpture Project in Münster, for example, was one of the earliest kind of regular exhibitions that focused on site-specific projects that take over a small Western city in Germany called Münster. And it was actually started as a one-off in 1977 and then managed to continue and repeats itself, is mounted every 4 years. And the city invites international artists to do very specifically site-specific projects in the public realm, ranging from sculpture to performance. So I kind of just wanted to breeze through a couple of examples of what place-based means, a couple of variations of what place-based can mean. Places with a Past, New Specific Art in Charleston's Spoleto Festival was mounted in 1991, I believe, by Mary Jane Jacobs, who is a curator whom I admire greatly. And she was, from what I've read, actually quite inspired by the Project Münster project. There were quite a few critiques of this project, which took place in South Carolina, among them the fact that it was actually organized as part of placemaking efforts to kind of enhance tourism in the area. And she also brought in mostly national and international artists from the outside who didn't really have a strong connection with the place, but commissioned them to respond to the place. This is the worst picture of my entire presentation, I promise. I could not find a better one. The next project that she did, which also was kind of coming out of some of the concepts in her original project, was Culture in Action, which took place in Chicago. And about 8 artists, most of them who are also activists, were all invited to work with particular community members. I'm just going to show 2 projects here. This is a project by Daniel J. Martinez, Joseph Martinez, who together with volunteers from Mexican American and Black neighborhoods created a joint parade between the neighborhoods. Oopsie. Okay.
Richard, do you see the arrow?
Yeah, I got it. Sorry about that. Okay, there we go. I had to move the box. Okay, this is another project that was done for Culture in Action by Kate Erickson and Mel Siegler. They worked with residents in a housing project to help them design a paint chart with the colors named after the events in the history of public housing. So in the upper top right, you see a color called Cabrini Green, and then there's also a color called Pruitt-Igoe Dust. These are not necessarily projects I love. I'm just showing them as a kind of like array of place-based projects. Here I'm dropping in one of my favorite projects, which is a project called Parlay, which took place in 2015. And was created for an exhibition called When You Cut Into the Present, the Future Leaks Out, curated by Regine Basha inside the old Bronx Borough Courthouse in the South Bronx, which had until recently been shuttered for 40 years. And in this project, this is just an image of Valerie Tavera to the far left, MC Lady, Lynn Saunders, B-Girl Rockefeller, and Angel Nevarez. So Angel and Valerie are collaborators. And I have to read from my notes here. So Parlay used here's just an image of the old Bronx Borough Courthouse. Looks very similar today, but it has recently reopened, not as a courthouse, but as a school. So Parlay used the musical framework of call and response to form a multilingual dialogue between 2 voices. The conversation is created through cut-up techniques and sampling of song lyrics from the early days of hip-hop, spoken by B-Girl Rockefeller and MC Lady L, both significant innovators in the hip-hop scene. This is kind of an example of a work to me that I feel really kind of responds to the framework of a site to tease out layers of history. And so it really kind of poignantly connects this contested site of criminal justice, the old Bronx Borough Courthouse, to the birthplace of hip hop in which the courthouse is cited, and also vocals that challenge authority. In the actual piece, the recall kind of switches between English and Spanish and English again. I'm just going to play a snippet that I will also have to fast forward through of the English component.
You know what? I want to tell you a little something about us. I know a few understand what I'm talking about.
You know, keep in mind that I've been out there from back in the days.
I heard a sound.
I heard a sound.
Now then, you know what I mean, so let your ears hear what your mind can't conceive.
Listen to what I'm saying. I'm going to break it down so you can see.
Don't push me, because I'm close to the edge. See, I don't know exactly what you know. I like to talk about fact, not fiction.
Sit and listen to the very essence of this tale. These are the devastating words that you never heard before.
So this conversation is somewhat hypothetical. My strategy is for you to see. My theory, so take a minute now to hear me.
So that was a snippet of Parlay. So as you saw from the image, there really isn't much to see. It was really completely a sound-based piece. So I'm now going to talk about an exhibition that I organized in 2016 called Jamaica Exchange. It was organized for No Longer Empty, and it was a site-responsive exhibition and socially engaged education platform that revolved around storytelling about a particular place, this being Jamaica, Queens in New York. The storefront was located, still is located, on 165th Street, which is a pedestrian street that is located kind of in the heart of downtown Jamaica. And the exhibition interweaved themes of commerce, movement, travel, considering how both objects and stories create resonant forms of communication and exchange. For those of you not familiar with Jamaica, Queens, it's the headquarters of the JFK Airport. It's in Queens, which is both the largest and most populated and ethnically diverse urban area in the world, apparently, representing over 138 languages. The exhibition took its name from the etymology of Jamaica. A lot of people assume that Jamaica is called Jamaica because there's a large West Indian population there. However, it's really a distortion of the original name of the Yameca or Jameco Indians. The project is kind of looking at that moment somewhat abstractly when the Yameca and the first settlers first encountered each other. And as legend has it, Jamaica was purchased by the settlers for, let's see here, 2 guns, a coat, powder, and lead. So from its origins, it has been a trade route. Originally, it was a rural village, but today's downtown Jamaica is still a major thoroughfare that is straddled by a majority of small business owners and migrant business owners. However, they're also at this moment, which may be halted as a result of the pandemic, facing rampant development as the local economic development corporations and the business improvement bids are all trying to make Jamaica, Queens a more desirable destination for everyone who flies into JFK. So trying to kind of like lure people from Brooklyn and Manhattan back into Jamaica, Queens. So as a result, all of the big box stores are moving in, which is again threatening the small business owners. So also I wanted to share that Jamaica, Queens is the birthplace of the 45th. So he was born and raised in Queens in Jamaica on the other side of the tracks. And there's actually been quite a lot written about that and how it might be his upbringing there that has been kind of responsible for shaping and informing all of his separatist and ideas about border and separation. And of course, it goes without saying that this particular neighborhood is also most gravely affected by his policies, in particular his anti-immigration policies. With a plush history of trade and commerce, jazz and hip hop, Jamaica's rich political heritage includes the abolitionist spirit of the 18th century New York Senator Rufus King. That is a museum in Jamaica as well. It is one of the only house museums in Jamaica. The activism of 19th century farmer, abolitionist, and publisher Wilson Rantus, and the political activism of former Black Panther Assata Shakur, who was born and raised in Jamaica as well. The Green is an African-American homestead from the 1800s that once ran parallel to the avenue that this site was located on, but is now concealed by concrete. Ironically, it was built over by the City University of New York in Jamaica, Queens. The exhibition featured almost exclusively local artists, and their artworks were all informed by the vernacular. This is an image of the inside of the space. It was a former ladies' apparel store called The Weekend. The artists and themes of the exhibition were all arrived at through the formation of a community advisory council that consisted of a variety of stakeholders, including, this is not the complete group, but including cultural workers, carpenters, business owners, activists, artists, did I say a construction worker, organizers, and we all met monthly for about almost a year prior to the exhibition opening to talk about what everyone felt, everyone who was representing the community felt wanted to be included in this exhibition, and what kind of art and what artists and what they actually wanted the art to respond to. So it was arrived at that most people really wanted the art to be able to provide something to do that responded to some of the difficulties of downtown Jamaica, and also wanted the exhibition to provide resources and opportunities for local artists to also present their work. So I'm just going to show a few images. I'm going to kind of bounce back and forth between these initial preparatory installation images so you can get a sense of how much the space changed. You'll also be seeing some installation views, and then you'll see how the exhibition actually transformed over the course of the entirety of the exhibition. So when you entered the space from the street, the front of the area was kind of a visitor services / education hub that was run by all of the youth docents and local high school students who were participating in our educational programs. And it kind of became a community center where everyone could drop off materials to promote their work and their businesses. This is also the front, but the other side of the table that I just showed you. And this is what we call the Jamaica Story Salon. And this is also at the beginning. So as we go through, you'll see that the walls get filled up with more and more materials. This is PJ Policarpio, who was an education fellow at the time. He led a lot of workshops around textiles and Filipino literature. This is an image of Ezra Ruby, who created a participatory piece called Words of Wisdom. And this is at the very beginning stages where he's kind of like mapping out the grid of the street view on the outside. Here are some installation views without visitors. One of the things I wanted to point out about this exhibition that was really, really important was it was meant to be a living exhibition, an exhibition that wasn't just an exhibition where you walked in and looked at art. You could do that. You could have a relationship with these discrete objects, but it was also meant to be a space where you could engage and participate and also be an active learner through the programming. So on the far right, you see another example of Ezra Ruby's work at a kind of like farther stage along. And I just wanted to go back, sorry, about, go back to Ezra's piece to talk a little bit about it. So he spent a lot of time walking around the neighborhood and meeting passerby and going into the businesses and asking people to donate objects and stories and to come into the site and participate in painting this. So the painting began, again, just as a kind of perspectival grid of the street, of the cobblestone street. And then as more and more people began to participate, it got farther and farther away from the visual kind of reproduction of the street and started to incorporate more personal items and feelings by community members. So I'm going to just show you this video here. And after about 30 seconds, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I mean, the full video is about almost 3 minutes long, and you can actually see it on his website or on Vimeo if you'd like to watch the whole thing. Oopsie, sorry about that. So I also wanted to point out that there was this interesting moment when the painting of Bob Marley appeared, because that then presented this conundrum for the community for a long time. For days, no one wanted to kind of like interrupt that painting. So it took a long time before the soccer ball appeared on the top of Bob Marley's head and then kind of started to like cover his face. And then in the end, you're also hearing, it's all ambient sound. And in the end, you're actually hearing a lot of the sounds from programming that was taking place inside the space. This is a work by Antonio Perez, Crochet Corner, which was actually responding to some concerns about trash in the neighborhood. So she's very much an environmentalist and decided to do a project where people could bring their trash bags, or their plastic bags rather, or shopping bags inside. It'd all be collected underneath the table. And she would teach people how to weave them and to transform them into more functional objects. So it was kind of a social gathering space, a crochet corner, but she also came in 3 days a week to teach people how to crochet. And for young children who were not quite yet of the age to be able to use the needles, she basically hung strips of plastic on the wall and taught them how to braid. So the braiding being a kind of precursor to learning how to weave. On the left is a project by Margaret Rose Vendries called African Diva Project Live, and to the right, just another image of Ezra's piece at a different stage during one of our programs. And the piece to the left is actually what you were hearing at the end of Ezra's project. And to the right here, you see the kind of stage that's being set for the African Diva Live project. So Margaret Rose Vendries is traditionally a painter, and you see her paintings here, and she's really interested in looking at the Black diaspora and also kind of using African masks to play with these ideas of gender and fluidity and power. And she used this opportunity at Jamaica Exchange to kind of expand her practice into a performative practice. To the right of the paintings, I don't know if you can see it, but to the right of the paintings are two changing rooms that she furnished with gowns and dresses and lights and masks. And so people could basically go into these rooms that she called these transformation rooms, come out, and in her words, get their African diva on. And then there was also music that they could play. So it basically became a very much kind of like a karaoke environment. And it was incredibly, incredibly popular with young teenagers. And so this part was also designed in response to the fact that there are very, very few places for teenagers to hang out in downtown Jamaica. They're kind of shooed off the streets. There's really no places for them to go after school. So this kind of became a part of the raison d'etre for this piece. Just a couple of examples of what it looks like when it gets really busy, some poetry readings that we had. To the right, you see a coffee station that I'll talk about a little bit more too. So this is Café Patoli, and they put this project in place because there were, at the time, now of course there's a Starbucks, but at the time there were very few places, or any places really, where you could just kind of go out, hang out and have like a coffee. So their response was this project, which is an ongoing project of theirs. They're called Diego de la Vega Coffee Co-op, which consists of Gabriela Ceja, who is in the photograph, and Fran Illich. And so their project is really about honoring coffee workers all over the world and supporting the farmers in Chiapas in Mexico. So in a kind of circuitous and probably illegal way, they're bringing coffee in and allowing it to be kind of like the source that, kind of like a foil for an educational and anarchist kind of coffee house. So you weren't supposed to pay for coffee. You could offer money if you wanted, but they were really much more interested in getting skill sets from the local community. So you could come in and get a coffee in exchange for, they never turned anyone away for coffee, but the whole objective was to kind of create this exchange bank so that people could exchange an hour of their time for someone else's skill set. And so this kind of became this like nexus for planning and organizing and playing games. And at some point, they also rolled in an anarchist library. So all of these projects kind of continue to evolve throughout the course of the exhibition. Here you see on the left-hand side, you see the receipts that they used for people to write down what their hour of time bank would be. And on the right, like at some places in coffee shops where they write your name, Gabriela would actually create these really cool little portraits of you on your cup. And this is a game that they played, and this game is, I always forget what it's called, I'm so sorry. It's called Patoli, and it's a Nahuatl game that was forbidden by the Spanish colonizers because the game allegedly was, you know, a way for the community to kind of release all of the wealth that they had and share it collectively. So this was a game that they were kind of teaching people anew. And instead of using money, we could use any objects that were available to us. A lot of coffee beans were used, but in the end, they also developed their own currency. And it was a small coin that had a beaver on it. In Jamaica, Queens, it was also at one point called the Land of the Beaver. And so through a series of conversations that they had with community members, they kind of collectively came up with a design that they wanted for their own currency. An installation view. This is an example of works that were borrowed, but were incredibly relevant to the exhibition. On the right-hand side are works by Rico Gatson, and the two drawings on the far right are images of musicians, and also Leroy Jones on the top and Coltrane on the bottom, who were very prominent figures in Jamaica, Queens. Leroy was one of the founding members of the African Poetry Theater, which was about 6 blocks away. And this area about 1 block away was a very active jazz scene prior, where Coltrane played often. So this was a kind of way of bringing existing works in that tapped into some of the histories of Jamaica, Queens. To the left is another example of that. This is an existing work by Carolina Caicedo of Assata Shakur. There were some really beautiful and interesting moments in this exhibition. For example, the son of Assata's previous roommate came in and was just like over the moon that he knew who she was. So there were these kinds of touch points that kept happening throughout the exhibition. In order to go upstairs, you had to go through an exhibition that was curated by the youth docents. So they created their own version of a historical exhibition. On the bottom, you see that they used kind of like color charts combined with historical images of Jamaica, Queens. And here they are. And so the youth docents would basically give tours of the exhibition, but not scripted tours of the exhibition. We didn't say, oh, here, memorize this. We invited them to kind of curate their own tours. And so we asked them each to pick 3 works that they really felt connected to their individual experiences or that they really liked, and that they could give tours of those 3 works to anyone who walked into the exhibition space. Here's another exhibition, another view of their exhibition. And then through their space, you would take the stairs up to what I think must have been a security room. It was kind of rigged with wires, and I imagine and it had a window, and I imagine that that's where management would look down into the space below. This is a project by Azikwe Mohammed called Jimmy's Thrift. And it's actually the 2nd iteration of a project of his that kind of keeps growing as it generates more and more materials through each iteration to kind of subsequently fill up the next iteration. And so it's filled with some objects that he's made, some objects that he's collected. It's meant to be kind of ambiguous. You can't purchase objects, but you can interact with most of them. So for example, on the table on the left, you see photo albums that he called Black Family Photo Albums, and they were a collection of images from over time. And then there were also images of families that were currently living in Jamaica. He invited people to come in and bring their old photographs so that he could scan them, kind of like recognizing that there's a fundamental digital divide. And then he also had audio recordings of interviews with people explaining the first time or describing the first time that they recognized that they were Black. He was very excited to do this project here because it was the first time that he was able to do this project in a community that he felt it was actually meant for. So now we're kind of going back onto the street. The windows are getting more and more filled with signs that the youth are making through workshops at printing centers. On the far right, you're seeing some images that will be referenced in the next photograph. As part of programming, we did a series called Once Upon a Place, and it was a series of socially engaged projects by 3 very different artists who were asked to design projects at the intersection of the everyday. And it was also meant to be a kind of humanities-based project that invited people to use their own skill sets to do research into their own communities. So Gabrielle Bendiner-Vianney is actually an urbanist, a writer, and an artist. And so she conducted interviews with anyone who wanted to participate as part of her intersection dialogue sessions. And a series of questions that she would ask people were like, what were their favorite places in Jamaica? Like, if they could recommend a place for anyone to go to, where would they recommend? What are the places that they missed? And what were some of their favorite places, even if they may have been imaginary? And then everyone, as you see on the right-hand side of the window, there's an image and a quote from their interview on the bottom. Project Luz Oral History Project by Sol Armendi. She is an educator and an activist who works very closely with immigrant communities, kind of combining art making projects, but also immigration rights. And for this project, she did something called the Jamaica Lookbook. The street on 106th Avenue had a lot of hair salons and a lot of clothing stores. And so she kind of worked with a lot of the workers to create this lookbook, which I unfortunately don't have the final version of. And so this is more or less a kind of sketch-up of it in progress. And then Nicolas Dumit Estevez did a project called Life as Material for Art and Vice Versa, in which he invited performance artists from all over the city, but mainly from Jamaica, Queens, to do performances and happenings on the street. He was encouraging them also to do everyday activities. So some people were doing jumping jacks, some people were sleeping or worshiping, but then some people also brought in projects that were much more kind of interactive. On the right is Shervon Nichols' wellness gathering station. So she would provide a series of different teas and information as well that would kind of let you know what, like, or you could rather, sorry, based on the symptoms that you might have, she would kind of connect you to a tea and natural remedies to help that. On the left is Dennis Redmoon Darkeem, who basically did this kind of performative project that involved exchange. So everyone or anyone could just exchange one object for another. So also kind of referencing the trade routes, the original trade routes that were nearby. So that was Jamaica Exchange. It was a really, really, really important project for me that has, I think, probably shaped everything that I've done since. So I just wanted to kind of talk about how I think or use a place-based lens when I think about other projects. One of the things that I love the most about site-responsive projects is the way in which they unearth stories that we might not otherwise hear. And so I've been playing with this idea of doing retrospective projects, but of course it's impossible to do a retrospective of place-based projects that existed at different times and moments, because of course then they would just lose their meaning. So I'm thinking now about the possibility of doing a book project inspired very much by Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. And I'm considering commissioning writers to write about particular place-based projects and kind of create a loose narrative from, you know, the time of Columbus roughly to the current moment. Another project that I was greatly influenced by is the 1619 project that the New York Times rolled out. Again, a project that very much is looking at objects, looking at reframing the the history of slavery as something that has completely shaped our society in ways that we're not willing to acknowledge, in ways that have kind of created these ideas about democracy, and in ways that have actually fundamentally undergirded the social justice movements in the United States. So some of the projects that I'm thinking about including in this book are just a few examples. Black Gotham Experience. It's a nonprofit organization in downtown New York City that was founded by Kamau Ware. And the story of origin is a real sweet story. He was working at the Tenement Museum in New York, giving tours. And one day he gave a tour to a group of Black high school students, and a young woman asked, you know, well, where are all the Black people? And after that, he was inspired to create his own organization that is using a lot of different media, but their main kind of mode is to do walking tours through the city of New York to talk about and tell stories and participate in storytelling around places and locations in the city that reference the Black diaspora. A lot of horrible corners of New York City as well, including markets that, you know, sold enslaved people. And the point of his exercise or his project is not to put monuments where there are no monuments. This is another conversation that we can talk about later, but rather to kind of continue in the tradition of oral storytelling, and through these walks, share these stories with others who in turn will continue to share these stories when they navigate through downtown New York City. Another project I'd love to focus on in this concept is called Designing the We, Undesign the Red Line. Designing the We is actually a design company that focuses on social justice issues, and they've created interactive exhibitions, workshops, symposia, and curriculum all around the history of redlining in the United States, but with a focus on New York. So now I'm going to switch to another format, which is the international residency format, which is kind of a challenging format in which to implement something that is place-based. International residencies kind of come out of a long history of cultural exchange and diplomacy, and facilitate opportunities for artists who are, of course, funded or sponsored to step out of their everyday lives and go live somewhere and do work in a place that is absolutely not their own. So I am implementing 2 residency programs. So I'm just gonna pop back for a moment. One that is a goal in the future to organize a residency program that is hyper local to the neighborhood that Residency Limited is located in, which is Carroll Gardens, New York. And to have this residency be a kind of long-term ongoing residency that welcomes artists and cultural workers who have a strong connection to Carroll Gardens, live, work, born there, and who will do community engaged work at these intersections of social justice. And then the project that is now in place, which launched this week online, super challenging, but here we are, is a project of New York City-based artists whose practices focus on filling in gaps in historical knowledge and in turn represent underrepresented voices. So we received 181 applicants and chose 4 artists. And just a glimpse through their work here. On the left is Carlos Rosales Silva. On the right, Christopher Udemetsue. Here on the left is Elizabeth Moran and Zieng Wu. And I'd like to just read a little bit of about their work in their words. How are we doing on time? Sorry, just checking in. Okay, so Carlos sees abstraction as a productive space in which to consider the states that brownness often resides in, the interstitial space between cultural preservation and assimilation, where home is experienced in memory and fleeting moments. His paintings are a meditative component of a research-based practice that focuses on a critical understanding of Western knowledge production, with a trajectory that considers a deep history of making that spans the complex visual communication of pre-colonial indigenous languages to the intentional and functional color language of small businesses and homeowners in predominantly brown neighborhoods. Christopher Uremetsue, whose work is on the right-hand side, his practice is driven by a personal and historical exploration of class, gender, race, sexuality, and ancestry. Grappling with the realization of his mother's volatile upbringing in Jamaica, Uremetsue considers the economic oppression of people of color in the United States and the Caribbean. Quote, "The ghetto never just becomes the ghetto overnight. Systems of oppression make ghettos. Systems of oppression make poor areas in Montego Bay, Jamaica, where my mother is from." Here on the left is Elizabeth Moran. This is a snippet from a kind of multi-year ongoing project in which she's examining the first professional fact checkers, a role invented in 1922 by Time, then a fledgling magazine, and a role held exclusively by women until 1971. As the artist mined Time Incorporated's corporate archives, she found that the majority of this narrative is told through the internal correspondences of the male colleagues of the women, fact checkers, rather than the women themselves. So her process, in a sense, is an investigation into which she will essentially fact check the history of fact checking, reperforming the fact checker's labor, and embodying the processes invented by the women. The work will both highlight the untrustworthiness of the available information about these women, but also for the first time publicly name the first fact checkers and present their story of the early days in the context of the early days of modern journalism. On the right, we have Ziyang Wu, whose most recent body of work examines how the virtual world ubiquitously alienates and reconstructs humanity in our highly globalized post-internet society, utilizing augmented reality, 3D printing, motion capture performance, social practice, artificial intelligence applications, and interactive video installations. The artist addresses how data and algorithms work as invisible forces in our everyday lives. Hello, Zoom. As a Chinese artist living in the United States, whose relationship with New York City has been largely impacted by his experience teaching at the School of Visual Arts and living in Brooklyn. And as we all are here in the grid on Zoom, this is pretty much how our residency is going right now. It was really interesting to see that the work of the 4 artists in the New York City Artist Program is perhaps more relevant than we could have ever imagined, and they're already starting to kind of shape their work to kind of address what's going on. And we'll be doing a lot of their programming online as well. Ziyang Wu is going to be doing a lot of workshops online that address issues of algorithms and racial profiling through facial recognitions. And Carlos, well, here you see all of us in our first welcome gathering. Usually we have a welcome breakfast where all of the incoming residents, which tend to be around 30 at a time, come together to meet the new residents who arrive. So Residency Unlimited at the moment, all of our international programs have ceased. The artists all had to return to their home countries. And like most organizations, Residency Unlimited is struggling. We're in emergency grant writing mode. We have cut down our staff. We haven't let go of anyone, but everyone's hours have been reduced. And now we're spending all of our time moving our programming and content online. We're reaching out, we're doing what a lot of people are doing really, and this is kind of what I'm trying to figure out. You know, you reach out to a community of 500 artists around the world and you kind of collect and gather their images and experiences of this particular moment. We're creating new content, we're digging into our archives with the artists into their archives and kind of reprising a lot of like past visions of the future that have now seemingly caught up with us. So this is kind of what brings me to this question of what place-based can possibly mean in this time of the coronavirus. And so here I find myself really with more questions. So as we shelter in place, and especially as the arts and culture sector has been deemed non-essential and we can't go to work, how do we re-essentialize the arts at this moment? Again, we're doing everything that everyone else is doing, but we also find ourselves in this rare moment where we are experiencing the same reality, but of course we're having our own individuated experiences. But for those of us here tonight, and for those of us on the other side of the digital divide, what does place-based look like when we're effectively living, working, playing, grieving exclusively on the screen? So thank you.
Okay.